The task of mapping the human psyche has been attempted by many wise people throughout the course of history, coming from many different professional backgrounds, from psychologists to historians, musicians to architects, and everything in between. An example of these is contemporary anthropologist Joseph Campbell, who emphasizes the relationship between the individual and the community with its collective archetypes. He draws a lot of his system from precedents set by the philosopher Carl Jung, who studied the exchange between the conscious and unconscious mind and is known for coining the terms anima and the collective unconscious. His work was guided by his colleague Sigmund Freud, who gave us the ego and id, or shadow, but he also brought in a mysterious Eastern philosophical element based on the Chinese text, the I-ching. In Chinese philosophy, the world is described in terms of the giving and receiving forces of yang and yin, and the I-ching elaborates on this further in the form of the 6 hexagrams. So, let's talk about the consciousness and subconscious. The term ego is commonly demonized, but the organ it describes is actually our active, conscious mind, and much like our heart or lungs, it is an essential component of our survival. Not something to be defeated or overcome any more than its counterpart, the id or subconscious. They are meant to be in a cyclical balance, alternating between each other as our waking and dreaming states, and from either vantage point we can gain insight on the other. The ancient symbol of yin and yang demonstrates their inseparable nature, and this alternating motion is what drives the mechanism of life itself. What we are striving to do with this model, just as scientists map the neural synapses in the brain, is get a clearer picture of the way thoughts exchange between the various chambers or organs of the psyche. We want to know how something can begin as an idea and result as a violent action, right? How associations are made, and the nature of memory itself. These are lofty goals, but stick with me. This is pretty effective. So first we have to look at the stages of life. The life stages take place in brackets of about 7 years. And traditionally, there are 6, though in the modern era our life expectancy has increased. Thus, the duration of the later periods may vary by the individual. Though they are usually associated with their actual chronological age, these phases also correlate to the maturation of the spirit, which is a never-ending process that constantly cycles back onto itself. So, familial roles. The age of a person / the stage of psychological development in question typically determines what society expects of them, how self-reliant they should be, how externalized their world is. In the I-ching, the familial role is also considered to identify what is proper and honorable behavior based on the ages of other members of the family and what major life events have occurred. We can use this concept in our psychoanalysis, much in the way various tarot systems use trump cards to identify the individual as being a certain age / having certain responsibilities, right? That would be king, queen, page, etc. This is particularly useful in dream reading because a dream may reveal the stage of individuation a person may have a blockage about via portraying them or others as being in a particular family position or phase of life. The external or conscious aspects are the masculine, in that they convey information from the subconscious to the external world, and they form a buffer layer between outside stimuli and the feminine subconscious. Information, traveling in either direction, must alternate between every layer of ego and id as far down as it is allowed to go. So, it may begin as a pure imaginative thought, but depending on where the individual's planets and aspects are, these factors modify that thought and temper how it will be expressed. Don't get too caught up on the gender words right now. These are meant in an alchemical way, and we'll get more into the detail of that later. So, zodiac pair alternation. The spiral diagram begins with the most conscious externalized sign and cycles down to the most internalized subconscious sign, the shadow. The outermost layer is the most conditioned, and thus the best equipped to interact with the external environment. But sensation gathered there has to go all through the levels of the psyche to get down to the shadow and be fully internalized. If the exchange is smooth at every step of the way, both receiving information and then cycling it back to the surface to become physical action, then there is no repression and the individual can live fully in the moment, which, for the most part, is the ultimate goal. If there are blockages, either with the surface layer not heeding the intuitions of the shadow and letting them out, or by not passing information all the way down, it creates trauma along the way. But by using the symbolic language of the zodiac, it is possible to quickly and effectively identify the problem areas, and once aware of them, the individual is empowered to develop the appropriate virtue and overcome the obstacle between ego and id, thus unifying the self. So, first stage of life is infancy. The most primal and vulnerable stage of development is infancy. Its subconscious feminine organ is the originator of all impulses, the deepest manifestation of the self, which is the shadow. Pure intuition, the very pulse of self-awareness, is embodied by Scorpio and represented by the little girl, unfettered by any of the restraints of reality. This is desire in its purest form, and some of the wishes can be dark until the little girl establishes a link to the outside world and discovers that she is not the only being that wants. So focus on that word want and desire. This base impulse is passed to the most delicate stage of the mind, and also the most free. That is to say, the least conditioned, which is the pure imagination of the little boy. Raw energy, the prima mobile, Aquarius is held by no bounds of mental conditioning. The subconscious impulse of want has found conscious manifestation in the idea of the self, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Now, the spirit, still unbridled by societal expectations, gets a glimpse of its dual identity and compulsion to share with itself. I want. Stage 2 is childhood. Initially, the self is only aware of a sense of longing, and at every stage thereafter, the subconscious is reminding the conscience about this base impulse. Now the young girl starts to become aware that there is an external environment, which could satisfy this urge, and she starts to analyze what it has to offer. What do I want? Well, what is there? This is Virgo, the maiden. Innocent from conditioned desires, she is able to appreciate things simply as they are and without an assigned intrinsic value. She carefully analyzes stimuli based only on their appeal to her personal preferences, though she must pass the impulse of like on to the conscious to actually categorize and communicate these characteristics. The second stage of development is childhood, 7 to 14 years of age or so. We start to form our own opinions about the environment and are extremely inquisitive and curious about it, testing our boundaries as much as possible and trying to figure out what our reality is. The conscious manifestation of this testing phase is Gemini, the young boy. At this stage, we are much more interested in satisfying our curiosity than making any final judgments about ourselves or fulfilling any higher ambitions, and the world seems free to conquer. Until some life experience comes along and squelches this perception, our willingness to make mistakes and freedom from concern about society's view of us enables us to undergo the most concentrated period of learning. I want to know more. Give me information. Stage 3, adolescence. Now that the individual has received the biggest single dose of information, they face the challenge of what to do about it. Not only that, but they have reached the age from 14 to about 21 where society demands for them to establish a predictable personality, be able to accept responsibility, and behave like an adult, despite hardly knowing who they are. The young lady begins to piece together the raw data into wisdom and develops a scheme of personal values that define her character. This is Cancer, who protects the soul and its core values from being changed by external pressures. I know what I want. At this point, the gender differences begin to become noticeable, and the spirit comes into puberty. The duality between the anima and ego is stark as night and day. The young man is very eager to find validation in the community, social and outgoing. That childhood curiosity about the environment now turns to his peers. He looks to see how they are coping with life's changes, and if he agrees, he may model behavior after them. This is Leo, who takes communication another step farther and begins exhibiting leadership and confidence. I want to be known. Stage 4, maturity. After the frustrations of adolescence, the individual comes into maturity with training, resources, and hopefully virtues to guide them. Libra is the independent woman, using critical thinking to judge situations and maintain values. From the trials of the previous cycle, she has decided she wants to be perceived with respect by others, so she invests heavily in her persona. She is still deciding who to trust and how to express her personal feminism, so the spirit and inner thoughts may be heavily guarded. I have constitution, I should be respected. The conscious aspect is able to draw from this inner fortitude and reinforce it with conviction. The male force must reconcile the societal expectations with his beliefs about the correct action, his view of his maleness and goals in life. This is Aries, the adult male, competing for environmental resources and asserting his value as an individual at about age 21 to 28. I am strong and in control. Stage 5, parenthood. Whether or not the individual has chosen to have children at this point or not, from about 28 to 42, we are compelled to give back to the society that raised us, perhaps by raising the next generation. We are expected to be well-established, good role models, and generous of the heart. This is Taurus, the ultimate mom, giving of self and spirit, and taking great personal satisfaction in nurturing others. She has come a long way from the primal impulse of selfish gratification, and now feeds the soul with altruism. I want to share my happiness. The maternal instinct of the soul is complemented by the archetypical all-father, Sagittarius. He is able to perform complex functions in society and procure resources for his family. He is a dedicated teacher, patient, inquisitive, and invested in the learning process himself. An excellent problem solver, he greets challenges as an opportunity to interact with other parts of the cycle and enjoys multi-generationalism. Life is a great adventure. Stage 6, eldership. In ancient times, from 42 to 56 was considered to be old age, but now we don't retire until long after then. However, the life function holds the same meaning, so it can be applied to the entire end phase of life. The duty of memory keeper is left to Pisces, the wise old woman, and the most externalized portion of the subconscious. Memory of real events is the closest the sleeping mind comes to the external world, so it is the function of this stage to recount what has happened and form opinions about it based on how it fits with stored associations. I remember my childhood dreams and cherish them still. The outermost shell of the consciousness is Capricorn, the old man. Hardened by years of experience, he has seen it all, and he is the first gatekeeper to the internal world. Through him, all sensation of the outer world has to pass first, and he keeps a high vantage point to be able to see everything going on. Pragmatic, he is able to react to situations quickly, cycling only to the external subconscious, which is the physical memory. Many situations may be addressed by him within a day, never going any deeper into the subconscious than that, and they must be internalized at night or in quiet moments. Failure to do so can create a hollow or robotic feeling. I am gravity, through me all things fall. Whew, so that was a lot to get through, a lot of information, very dense. Like I said, do what you need to do, take a break, take notes. Although these age brackets aren't meant to be super rigid, and these symbols aren't meant to be necessarily very literal, sometimes it is kind of helpful to take them at face value and examine phases of life in this way, just with the understanding that each individual, regardless of their physical gender, is undergoing all of them. And there is this continuous cycle and spectrum that we're going through. And I personally believe that this is a very healthy outlook on gender and social roles, and just examining different jobs we take on in society throughout different phases of our life. This sharing that goes on, and this processing of information and passing it off for inspection by other members of society. But it's not meant to be some be-all and end-all literal thing. It's meant to illustrate these bold points in the process and help to highlight them. So think very critical about it. Apply it to what's going on in your life. Just because you are currently a parent, you may be undergoing right now revisiting your inner child and trying to reconnect with them. That's a thing that we go through many times throughout life, and it can be really therapeutic to do so, to recapture that sense of both curiosity in the conscious aspect and, the analysis and the value forming of the subconscious aspect. So really thinking about how this affects us personally is a good meditation, and I'm going to get through this little recap, and then we'll look at the visual, and it'll be much, much clearer. I'm sorry, it's just so much to get through. So this part, and I realize the irony of saying this, being that the whole system is largely pretty experimental, but this part is a newer hypothesis of mine, which is an update from when this lecture was originally written some 5 years ago. One of the hardest things about self-education, once you get past resistance, develop good habits, and get to the point where you can readily sit down and do it, which is by and large the very hardest bit, is figuring out what you don't know. It's very easy these days with the way our educational system is rigged to take a class on something and kind of assume that you've gotten a good handle on it if you did well, especially at higher levels of ed, but that is beyond bogus. There is so much content to cover in any one subject. There's just no way, no matter how good a professor you had or how much additional personal study you did, to get it all. And of course, there's always new information, new research being made available all the time you need to use to update your knowledge base. So, full disclaimer, this is a pretty recent addition. I'm a little new to the subject, and it is arguably one that even the most informed on it know precious little about anyway. I took some anatomy, physiology, pre-med classes, and a cadaver dissection lab in college, but we focused more on muscles and the sensory organs without really getting into the different areas of the brain. I went on to study a lot more about the endocrine and nervous systems, but still didn't really look too hard at the physical structure of the brain itself. So I am striving to go back and do that now and see how it may be applicable to this work. My hypothesis is that this life cycle meditation process that I am teaching you here may correlate to the interaction between the left and right hemispheres of the brain via the corpus callosum. I say that based on one specific nugget I recently found when I wanted to know how dominance is asserted of one over the other, and was greeted with the customary scientific, "We don't know." What we do know is that simply physically impeding certain neurons does not always inhibit the function. The brain has ways of forming new connections and healing to some degree, and not all physical brain injuries result in total debilitation. So the takeaway from those experiments was that inhibitions were still happening of the left hemisphere over the right, not necessarily by the physical blockages that they were attempting, but just on their own via a delay. Not only do the hemispheres, via some manner of electrical signal we don't fully understand, inhibit one another to prevent crosstalk and to help them specialize in their own tasks, but there is a sort of generalized dominance that happens for the left part because it is granted kind of a first crack at everything before the same signal passes over to the right. Normally, the signal would sort of work its way to the portion that typically specializes in the thing most appropriate. I won't try to list them all, but in a very broad definition, the right side deals with the general and the left the specific. So there is an intentionally evolved delay where the right side might not get to offer up its response. The brain on the left can resolve it and put the issue immediately to bed. But that's not how it's supposed to work. The right hemisphere is specifically designed to better deal with roughly half of the human experience, so shutting it down or not developing it can be really detrimental to your overall brain function. It is important to use your whole mind, but if your left side gets free rein to discard any stimuli it deems undesirable or not congruous with its existing assumptions, those experiences don't just go away. They get delayed. So they're still filed somewhere in the right hemisphere, and they may come up later as repressed, maybe in anxiety, nightmares, what have you, because that part is still trying to work through it, even if it didn't get the best chance to do that in a healthy way from the get-go, by dealing with it right when it happened. It got to fester. So evidently, if this happens enough times, the things that the left threw out as anomalies or irregularities will start to accumulate there, and because the function of the right side is to do just this exact thing, it will start to recognize patterns among these anomalies. And eventually, when the patterns of these outliers form a strong enough story, stronger than the one being told by the left, a radical inversion will occur and the individual can experience a total shift in personality. This can be triggered by a major traumatic life event as well, but it doesn't necessarily happen all at one time. It can build up for years and have something just be the straw that broke the camel's back. This might possibly correlate to what is affectionately called a midlife crisis. Of course, the time frame specifically of that is totally unique to the individual. It can just be an awakening where you think to yourself, man, I really need to get my life sorted out. It can be spiritual awakening, perhaps, or brought on by deep meditation or use of psychedelics. Maybe it's a traumatic event like the loss of a loved one or a relationship or a job, something that derails you or throws you from your rigid worldview and forces you to question the nature of your reality. So, does this exercise that I'm presenting you actually help strengthen the plasticity of the corpus callosum and facilitate the healthy compartmentalization and flow of signals between the hemispheres of the brain? I can't possibly say. We have only just begun to test this hypothesis. But I hope you, as a guinea pig, will at least find it beneficial and enjoyable without some sweeping scientific discovery attached. Though that may be a possibility. We'll see. So let's try another breakdown of how to do this method. I went back and thought about it, and I just feel like my old explanation could be a bit more clear. At the most basic stripped down explanation, you are asking yourself 6 times, what do I think? How do I feel? Trying at each interval to ask those questions from the perspective of a particular bracket of life with which it's associated, so societal expectations and level of maturity. If you've never read the work of Kurt Vonnegut, well, you have to. It's the law. But in all seriousness, he has a concept for a creature called a Tralfamadorian, which in some of the books is more like an alien, other times a robot. But he describes their vision as being able to perceive a being as a continuum of its whole life. It's very trippy to visualize, I know. But it might be really beneficial for you to do this as a personal growth activity. Either gather some pictures of your life from different ages, maybe sketch it out, at least these 6 different phases of life, what you look like, right? Think about what is the total you. So those are the people who, yes, they are all you, but no, they're not exactly the same person. It's like there are multiple incarnations of your same soul in the same changing body, all in one life. You lost yet? If you are able to readily do this, you can respond to situations in your life in a very consistent and integrated way. They say, be who you needed when you were younger. So, of course, your adult self might not make exactly the same call as the child would, but think about, would the child version of me be proud of what I am doing? Would they think I am weak or a sellout? Children, as you well know, if you have them or work with them, have zero filters whatsoever. They are mean. They can see your weaknesses, right? They can sense it. They can make some of the most brutally honest observations, and to them, it's just as casual as reporting on the weather. They don't have tact or sympathy for when someone is self-conscious about something. So think about that if you feel that your values as a child were wholesome and intrinsic and based on some really idealized version of the perfect you. That can be a pretty great compass for which way to go. If growing up means constantly compromising your personal morals and values for the comfort of other people, is it really all that great? But also realize that tempering that with the compassion and wisdom is what makes adults able to adapt and handle more sophisticated problems, and somewhere down the line we get old and we don't care what anyone thinks of us anymore. We come to be childlike and free again. So since this cyclical change is inevitable, why not use awareness of it to our advantage and live authentically? When you have an impulse, you go through this cycle in deciding how to act on it. At any stage in the cycle, a totally different action may end up getting triggered based on the conclusion struck by that phase. When you feel, say, bored, how do you decide what to do about it? In your subconscious, you feel, hey, I want something, in the most general possible way. If it's a strong enough impulse, your consciousness perks up. Oh man, heck, yes, I want something. I'm bored. And the impulse starts to gain some momentum. That's the infant Scorpio/Aquarius level. It starts to come into focus in the child, Virgo/Gemini. They say, I'm not satisfied, I require stimulation. And so you think, oh, well, let's mull over these options that spring to mind. In the youth, Cancer/Leo, the subconscious feels out, which of these do I really want? And latches onto the one that is giving the biggest emotional tug. The intuition suggests that is what to go with. Okay, yeah, that does sound good. Let's go for it, the conscious mind confirms. If at that stage the opposite had occurred, nothing sounded good, not enough emotional momentum built up, and you didn't feel strongly enough to get off the couch and do it, you stay put. But if you did give the go code, here in mature Venus/Mars, the plan starts to be put into action. Say you were bored and decided to go out to eat. Just alone, though, because we all know what an arduous process it is to try to get others in agreeing on where to go. So your subconscious goes, I'm really feeling it, let's get ready. This is my ideal scenario. And runs through some previous instances of this outcome. Maybe it's someplace that you go a lot. You are quite familiar with it, and you know the waitstaff. So you dress very casually and have certain expectations. As the preparations of action, your consciousness spurs you, okay, shoes on, keys in hand, ready to go. Then the parental Taurus/Sagittarius slams on the brakes. Intuitively, you sense that you have forgotten something and run through some more scenarios, again drawing from worldly knowledge. Your inner mom goes, what's it like out? Should I grab a jacket? Is it going to rain? Did I brush my teeth? And saves you from potential discomfort and inconvenience. Thanks, Mom. Me, you rock. Dad goes and checks all the boxes. I don't need to grab an umbrella because I just leave all that crap in the car all the time in case the need arises. Perpetually prepared. Great job, Dad. Messy but effective. Finally, we are out on the externalized ring of the elders, Pisces and Capricorn. As you are in the process of acting, maybe on the drive there, you pop on some music and let your mind wander, remembering good times with friends from going there before. I love this place. It's where I had my first date. I wonder whatever happened to them. You arrive, enjoy your meal, and Grandpappy takes care of all the technicalities. Here's the mental spreadsheet of the budget. This young lady did such a nice job. Let's tip her really well, so let's carry the 3. Man, I hate these newfangled chip readers. Why, back in my day, so on and so forth. This full cycle can happen extremely fast. It's often really hard to be patient and walk through the whole thing. Sometimes we overlook the really low levels completely because they are just so general and basic. Just acknowledge them once in a while. Sometimes it can be helpful more just to go, say you were having trouble getting over a craving, right? Well, let's go with smoking. That's pretty common. You consciously want to quit and protect your health. It's part of the things you want to improve about yourself. Good on you. So how do you mentally do that? I don't claim to be any expert in smoking cessation. I've never been addicted. I smoked a bit when I was younger, but I could always stop cold turkey, no big deal. It drove people around me crazy. But I think this is kind of why. Usually when you are having a craving or withdrawal, you get a little mantra going in your head. Man, I really want to smoke. Try pushing that down a little farther, down to the infant subconscious, remembering that you really don't know what you want down there. You know that you want. The stimuli is pretty vague, and you are open to new sensations. So you stop saying the mantra, start dismantling the association, particularly when it's an activity you do tandem with other activities, right? Maybe you always smoke when you drink, or you smoke in the car. Unlink those, which you do by throwing off your habits. If you always smoke in the car, randomly smoke somewhere or sometime that you kind of don't even feel like it. If you do this enough, it will throw off your if this, then smoke associations, and it will be easier to fight the cravings. If you've ever tried just lessening the frequency or amount, and that's really not working, kind of keep your same nicotine level overall, but in totally different ways, if that makes sense. Once the associations are a bit weaker, you can start to replace urges with something else, some other reward. Think about something you like that won't kill you. Maybe, it's Gushers, which it absolutely should be because they are bomb. So make a reward swap. Cost-wise, I think Gushers might ironically be cheaper despite what my parents led me to believe whenever I asked for them. So start to form new associations. Eat Gushers in the car as a reward for not smoking there. Focused on the rawest impulse, I want. Say it out loud if you are alone, as unreasonably as a toddler would. And stop saying in your head specifically, I want a cigarette. It can open up your cravings to tons of new possibilities, right? Maybe if you use this more just for eating healthy, it's pretty easy to reprogram the body itself to crave things that actually make it feel good. The addictive stuff is mostly in the brain, and we can consciously train it differently. But only if we also address the subconscious impulses and validate them. So hopefully this really helps any of you who are actually struggling with that in specific. Let me know in the comments if this trick worked for you. So back to our mind castle. We've looked at how impulse becomes action. Let's talk now about how a happening becomes internalized. We want to make sure we put it into its correct place. We want our mind to be tidy, for it to be easy to find things next to other things that they go with. There's so much going on in our environment that is just junk. Our mind can get cluttered with overstimulation of all these things competing for our attention. It's a good idea to train yourself to tune out things like ads, commercials, attention-seeking behaviors, and neurotic outbursts that there isn't necessarily any meaning to derive from. But you also don't want to just put blinders on and not notice beauty happening around you. So we have to build strong filters to discriminate between the authentic and the fake. And these exercises are a part of what helps us to do that. It can really reduce our overall stress and help us to not get overwhelmed. So for our example, let's say you experience something bad. You witness an injustice. You are on the bus, and there is a Muslim woman in a headscarf being verbally accosted by a strange man, hurling racist rhetoric at her. Facing your eldest out of the world, your externalized dealing with the daily life type consciousness quickly recognizes the interplay of what's going on and reports it. There is a threat situation occurring, and injustice is in progress. Here are the participants, and this is the status of the environment. Action is needed. What is appropriate? He says. The subconscious, at its outermost level, quickly cycles through the library of available memories from similar life events. Let's say for this example, though, there isn't one to be found. You've never been put on the spot like this, and you are ill at ease. I don't have a precedent for this situation. Let's look at my personal values and decide on a course of action, she says. Now, the father says, this isn't right. We have a social obligation to protect each other. This should not be happening. I might not be the best person for the job, but if nobody else will take a stand, I guess this is where I make mine. The mother agrees. This is not the world I want for my children. It is important to set an appropriate example. What is the correct method of response? Now, this stage may seem uncomfortably indecisive, maybe. It seems like it would be resolved right there and may outwardly look like in the reaction that it did. But keep in mind that all of this is happening incredibly quickly. It is just as important that we are taking the time to actually internalize things and make correct associations for ourselves as they are happening, to prevent them from being dismissed or filed away incorrectly, or to make sure we are assigning an appropriate level of severity to whatever it is, compared to our values. Remember, our goal is consistency. So, the mature man weighs the options. Since the nature of the assault is a physical invasion of space, equal force must be exerted, not to be exceeded unless the situation escalates. Anything less would not pay respect to the seriousness of the gesture. But let's draw from our inner strength, because that would be inviting further discomfort, and I need to come from an authentic place. The mature woman states, I value peace. This is a violation of that. I feel a deep-seated love for an individual's right to autonomy in their own space, and a reasonable expectation of safety in public. I would not want to be treated this way, so I will leverage my privilege in this instance to demonstrate the wrongness of the behavior. Maybe if I do it now, more people will know what to do later. These are the mature convictions that the adult mind can form. But the roots do still stretch back into the younger stages. So, kind of lock this fully articulated conclusion in your mind as we work backward and strip away this more balanced worldview. The young man says, I want to do what's right. I want to be viewed by others as a good person. The young lady says, it's a slippery slope. I need to show my inner strength and not ever lower my standards. So at each level we go down, it gets a bit simpler. The boy states, a challenge. Let's see what will happen. Unfazed by perceived negative consequences, as no previous negative trauma was present from the memories higher up, remember, to dissuade from taking action, and enough emotional momentum has been formed to draw personal power from deep down in the subconscious. The girl says, I want to observe a reaction. I see something happening. Let's interject and change to see the result. Notice the complexity of statements and gender differences becoming very minuscule this far down. Now the imagination says, what's the worst that could happen? And the shadow succinctly says, what? Now, maybe the last one seems a bit abrupt, but notice how eloquently it summarizes the entire feeling of being in that situation, just the shock and being taken aback by what would normally be considered a social anomaly if you hadn't personally experienced it. Even if you are aware that such things can happen, that's a world away from when it's actually happening to you. And even if you technically know what you are supposed to do, what's the margin of people who are actually going to follow through? Tiny. So think about that. What? In the most raw, guttural way. Scrunch your face. Take on the excuse you? Oh no you didn't tone of voice. Let the raw energy of your disapproval resonate through your whole body. That is the power that you can rally behind the action you are about to take. That is the deep down place that not only permits you to go as far as you need to, but bring it up from a place of you. This is what you are doing. This is what you would do. It is an embodiment of your values, and that would be true of whatever conclusion that you would come to. But for the sake of this example, let's say that you walked right up to the guy and stood defensively between him and his victim. Let's say you got up in his face to show him what it felt like, embarrassed him in front of all the other passengers, and demanded to know, what do you think you are doing? with the full force of the what brought up from the shadow. Most of these cowards have never been challenged before, and that's why they keep doing it. Your demonstration might make all the difference in the world for each observer present, because you didn't hesitate. If you can access the full range of your authentic self like this, you can put so much extra oomph into your presence, dispel any doubt, but also not be too rash or impulsive. Now, you might have reached the same conclusion, but if left on the surface, leaving it all up to Grandpa to go over and punch the guy, that might turn out okay, or you might get arrested. In any case, it's not really the fullest answer that is appropriate to your actual observations on the circumstance. You can react decisively without just knee-jerking. You can train yourself to do this in mental exercises by looking at different situations and possible outcomes. You can take the guesswork out of life by thinking things out. Daydream, if you will, about emergency situations or things that might make you uncomfortable. Truly listen to people and their experiences. Read books, watch movies, but always take a moment to pause and go, what would I do in that situation? And really plan it out. If you find someone who has been through something like that, ask them about it. Take note of the outcomes. Update your point of view. That's what life is all about. There's no honor in shrugging or giving into the herd chant of, I don't know. It's the weakest possible phrase in the whole of our language. Get it out of your vocab. If you must say it, say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And train. Study hard. If you don't think you would do well in an altercation, maybe try some martial arts or self-defense. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain from every educational opportunity you expose yourself to. You can't be afraid of what you know you can deal with. Confidence can be cultivated with preparation. Specifically, challenge yourself to face things that you fear or make you uncomfortable, and you will see yourself thrive in all areas of life too. You are raising your entire standard up, away from the places of powerlessness and lack of control over your life. Target the lowest points if you can, and your rock bottom will never be below that again. You will never fall all that way down again. Yes, you will have times in your life that are truly traumatic or will introduce things that you don't have a precedent to deal with, but if you take some time to work on things that you know you are weak at, then you give yourself overall preparedness by contemplating your own mortality and making peace with it. You will be bulletproof. You can never be less than you are, and I think that's the closest thing to safety that